pastor said I need to get up here and sing.
Amen.
So I told her my voice hadn't been, my throat has been messing up, but I'm gonna try this. But I was reading devotional this morning, and it's talking about how we live today, how we don't love like we should, how we don't, think of God as always being there, and how we turn away from Him. He never leaves us, but we leave Him, and He's always right where we left Him. And that how we should continue in this world today. It seems like, we hate each other. We're always fighting. We don't talk about God. We don't share His love with others. And, we just need to get back to that. But, I just want to thank God that He doesn't leave us. He's always there. So this song is almost like a prayer to God. So I hope I can sing it. Father, thank you for being there with tender loving care. Thank you for showing us the way. Show us the light. We want to know what's right for our lives. You dwell deep within our soul. Your love keeps us whole. Come into our world. Won't you please? With wings of a dove, treasures from above, learning how to love. Lord Jesus, you are all we need. You bless us to succeed, and your gentle touch, yes, it means so much to me. In all we give praise to you for all the wondrous things you do. And one day we look forward to seeing your face. And oh, Lord, show us the way, Lord. Brighten up our day. You brighten up our day so heaven can see. So all of heaven can see that we're just learning how to love. Oh, Lord, show us the way. Brighten up our day. Lord, you brighten up our day so heaven can see. So all of heaven can see that we're just learning how to love. Amen.
Amen. How's everybody doing today? Good, good. Pray you guys having a good day. God blessing you and your life. Parents on. Can you hear me now? There we go. Much better, much better. So anyway, now with this tongue in our mouth, and James is trying to make it very clear to us that, you need to be able to control that tongue, but you can't just say, I'm going to get up in the morning, do my spiritual exercise, and say, tongue, be under my command. We all have failed in trying to do that. So what he's teaching us, you need to surrender your tongue to God, allow him to use it for you, allow him to give you the means and the power to overcome this device in our mouth that has been used, can do great things, but it also can be used to do a lot of destructive things as well. One of the things that we talked about last week, talking about the tongue has the power to direct, because they give the illustration of a bit in a horse's mouth and a rudder on a ship, how these small little things can control massive animal or massive ship. And you also learn that the tongue has the power to destroy, because it used the analogy of a little spark or a little fire that can just turn it and consume a whole forest. And so we got to be careful with our tongue. But the biggest thing, I think that the most great thing that we can learn from this lesson here last week is the tongue has the power to delight. The power to delight. Because he kind of used the comparison of sweet water or a fig tree, how each one of those things provides substance and livelihood for somebody else. So your tongue, you can say the right words at the right time, and it can change the course of somebody's life. You have no idea what somebody may be going through. And you just may come by and say, Jesus love you, or how you doing, or whatever the case may be. And those words, it may just take their life and turn their life around if we just trust God. Let God have your tongue. But then we come to this text today, second part of this verse, looking at chapter 3, starting from verse 13 through 18. So we're going to go ahead and pick it up, and this one here focuses on the characteristic of God's wisdom, the characteristic of his wisdom. Now, as I read through this, I need you to remember the context in which we're reading. James is dealing with somebody who desires to be a master, a spiritual leader, somebody who wants to be out front and say, yo, listen to me, how much I can influence you or guide you on spiritual matters. So in that context, we got to keep that same mindset as we're dealing with the subject of wisdom. And he says here, verse 13, he said, who is a wise man and do it, which means to provide, with knowledge amongst you, and that word you is plural, meaning he's talking to all of them. He said, let him show out of good conversation his work with meekness and of wisdom. But if ye have bitter envy and strife in your heart, glory not and lie not against the truth. The wisdom descended not from above, but is earthly, sensual, and devilish. For where envy and strife is, there is confusion in every evil work. And then to continue on, get my paper together here. He said in verse 17, he said, but the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, easy to be entreated, full of mercy, good fruit without partiality, and without hypocrisy. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace. So as you look and read over the text again, as you see how James is trying to break things out, he is doing a comparison between earthly wisdom and godly wisdom. He's making a big comparison there. So as we begin to go through this message, I need you to really understand the message that James is trying to teach us, that there is a difference between what man can conjure up and how to deal with issue and what God is telling you how to deal with it. Big difference. So we got to get to the place, which one are we going to follow? But before we get into that, we need to understand the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Let's kind of dive into that first. So what is the difference? So what is wisdom and what is the difference between knowledge and wisdom? First, I'll give you a definition of wisdom. He said the ability to discern or judge what is true, right, or lasting. And the word knowledge is also defined as information gained through experience, reasoning, and acquaintance. Knowledge makes us smart about things, but wisdom help us apply that knowledge. That's a big difference. Even in James chapter 3 here, he kind of explains the difference between the two. Look at the verse here in 13. Look at verse 13. He said, who is a wise man and endue it, which means provide knowledge amongst you. So he asking a rhetorical question here. He starts out saying, who amongst you have all this wisdom and this knowledge? And then he kind of explains, he said, let him show out of good conversation his work with meekness and goodness. So what James is basically saying in context, he's saying that the person that desired the office of a master or a spiritual leader, he said, let your knowledge be seen in your conversation, which means your behavior. So you may call yourself, I know the Bible. I know this about God. I know a lot. and then what James said, don't just listen to what they say, watch their action. Watch your action. Is that knowledge being seen in your action? And that's what he telling them. He said, let him show out of good conversation, which is his conduct, his work with meekness and wisdom. How do you apply that knowledge? How do you apply all this understanding you have? Knowledge can exist without wisdom, but wisdom cannot exist without knowledge. You got to have both. Let me give you an example here. I remember when I was working in transportation on the base, and I ran into this one supervisor, and he was telling me about this one kid they got. Very bright, very smart, and he was able to remember a lot of things. And he began to read all the pamphlets and all the instructions how to rebuild the engine. And so as he sit back, he could tell everybody the whole process how to build an engine. And then one day the supervisor brought up to him a toolbox. He said, here you go, rebuild the engine. He didn't know the first thing what to do. He couldn't apply the knowledge. He had all the book sense what to do, but he couldn't get a tool or wrench in his hand and actually start working on the engine and make it happen. He had knowledge, but he didn't have wisdom. But before you can have wisdom, you got to first have knowledge. So even in the Bible in our Bible study, from a biblical perspective, we can know a lot of scriptures. You can memorize the Bible front and back, but you got to have wisdom to know how to apply it in your everyday life. That makes the difference there. He said because knowledge, memorizing, and then also you can have knowledge about biblical principle and doctrine, but wisdom allowed me to see how good God is and how much I can trust him. How much biblical doctrine do you know? It's great to have it. You need to know it. But if it just stopped with you knowing the knowledge and quote scriptures, you still haven't arrived. You have to be able to apply it. And when you begin to understand biblical doctrine, what did that mean to you? What did it mean when you understand how good God is or how great he is or understand all the different doctrines in the Bible? It should translate to you and say, you know what? If God can do this for me, if God is this type of person, I should be able to trust him with anything. Regardless of what you're facing, you should be able to trust him. But then in a general sense, we all should strive, as James is trying to describe here, godly wisdom, godly wisdom. So let's look here into the message that James is breaking down about the difference between earthly wisdom and godly wisdom. But before I get into the message, let me make sure I give a disclaimer here. Earthly wisdom is not all wrong. Some of the stuff that we experience, y'all's cell phone, it took somebody with some wisdom to develop that. The car you drive, it took somebody with some understanding to develop that. So not everything that's earthly is wrong. But in the sense that James is speaking of, he said, if your earthly wisdom contradicts God's standard, then it is wrong. Make sure we understand as we go through this what James is speaking. So as we now look at your text here, let's go back to our Bible, because I'm going to divide it into 3 areas about this wisdom. The first one is showing what makes godly wisdom better than earthly wisdom is the difference in its origin. Let's look at the text. Look at verse 15. If you look at that verse 15, it tells us the origin of earthly wisdom. He said, wisdom descended not from above, but is earthly, sensual, and devilish. So now you see the difference. And then if you go and look down later in verse 17, it tells you that the wisdom from above is godly wisdom. So he gives you a difference in distinction and the origin where it's from. Now this is important because you need to understand the source of where you're getting your information and your understanding. He's saying this earthly wisdom is first earthly, sensual, and devilish. Let's kind of break those 3 words down, and you'll see where this is based out of. First, he says earthly, but I'm going to move on to sensual. We'll come back to earthly. The word sensual there basically means natural. It comes from the natural man, from what's inside of man. You understand that as you begin to face different life circumstances, life situations, you're going to have to make a decision how you're going to deal or respond to that. Either you're going to respond God's way or you respond man's way. So when you begin to look at this, you got to understand, what did the Bible say about us as humans? First, he says here, look at Ecclesiastes 7, verse 20. He says, for there is not a just man upon the earth that doeth good or sinneth not. That's what he described by man. We also see in Jeremiah 17:9, he said, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? Now he's saying that's the source of human wisdom. Come from a source of wickedness. Something that's saying can't be trusted. So why do we trust it then? If the source can't be trusted. That's what the Bible teaches us. Human understanding. For there is not a just man upon the earth that doeth good. And then it says in Jeremiah, the heart is deceitful above all things. Who can know it? Who can know it? But then he also look at another word. He said it is devilish, which is demonic. Understand that the devil is not here to build you up. He is not here to make you holy and godly. He may bring about some things in your life that you may say, man, good, I got this blessing. But you better understand the source of that blessing. Because Satan can bless you as well. You may say, man, I got a new car. I got a new promotion. I got a new this, new that. But then you better understand the outcome. Is that promotion keeping you away from church? You got to ask, is that from God? Is this promotion bringing out pride in your life? Or this new device or this new car or the new house, is it bringing pride in your life and make you walk around and say, look what I got? Then you got to ask yourself, is this from God? Because the Bible says here in John 8:44, he said, you are of your father, the devil. He's talking to those people that were trying to trick him. He said, and the lust of your father you will do. He was a murderer from the beginning and abode not in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he speaketh a lie, he speaketh of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. 1 Peter 5:8 said, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about seeking whom he may devour. This is the second element of what he said, the source of human wisdom. He said, first it's come from sensual, which is humanity, which he says is evil and wicked. Then he says it comes from the devil, who's a murderer and a liar. And then he look at the very first, he said earthly. It's earthly. Now you understand that 2 Corinthians 4:4 said, in whom the God of this world had blinded the minds of them which believe not. Who did he say was the God of the world? Satan. So now he's saying earthly wisdom, the origin of earthly wisdom comes from the earth, meaning this world system, which the God of this world is Satan. Then he says it comes from a humanity side, what the Bible says is evil and wicked, who can trust it? Then it said it's from the devil himself, who's going about seeking whom he may devour. So if we understand the source of something, why do we continue to put our trust in it? Why do we do that? I remember somebody was telling me about a food item. And he said, do you understand what that stuff is made out of? I said, no. He began to break it down, show me all the different ingredients in this item that I was often buying. And once he showed me, he said, this is the same stuff that they use to make plastic with. I said, ooh. I never bought it again. I never bought that thing again. Because he changed my information about the source of what I was eating. Even though it tasted good to my body, my flesh desired it, my flesh craved it. He said, do you understand where it's coming from? Many of you probably had the same testimony, how you love something, then all of a sudden you found out the true origin of it. And you begin to say, you know what, I think I need to let that go. I'm going to let that go. And I'm not going to give you out the detail because some of y'all be like, what? But anyway, you need to understand the source of where you are basing your understanding of. But what James is saying, he said, earthly wisdom comes from a place that is completely defiled. But he said, godly wisdom. Godly wisdom. Look at verse 17. He said, but the wisdom that is from above. Above. Above represents heaven. What do we know that all came out of heaven? First thing you know that came out of heaven is the place that would free us from death, sorrow, and pain. That's a verse we use at funerals all the time. In Revelation 21:4 said, and God shall wipe away all their tears from their eyes. And there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. This is referring to a person who had passed from this life, earthly life, and went to heaven to be in the presence of God. No more pain, no more death, no more sorrow. That's what he's saying the source of godly wisdom comes from. It is also the same place that God the Father chose to send his love, which is Jesus, because he loved us so much. He sent Jesus to die for us, to become our redemption, to save us. Think about the source. You have one source that's devilish. Another source that's telling us it is a place of wickedness, a place where the father of it is a liar and a murderer. But then you have the other place is a place where God said, I love them so much that I'm going to send my son to die for them. to redeem them. They don't know, but they're on a path to destruction. He says, son, I'm going to need you to go down there, leave this place of glory, leave this place of purity. I need you to go to that God-forsaken earth down there and be ridiculed, be punished, be killed for their, what? Salvation. For their salvation. That's the place where God said is godly wisdom. Which one do you think you need to be dependent upon and trusted in? The one from heaven. The one from God. But so often, we seem to throw our nose at God and listen to what self says, what the world says, what philosophy says. That's one we always tend to lean to. But why is that? Why is that? Here's another example that James is teaching us about the difference between earthly wisdom and godly wisdom. He's saying that they differ in their effects on humanity. Their effects on humanity. Looking at the text here, look at verse 14. He says, but if ye have bitter envy, bitter is an adjective describing envy. He said, bitter envying and strife in your heart. Glory not and lie not against the truth. That is the characteristic that he is defining with earthly wisdom. He said that this wisdom that we like to crave and desire, he said it is inwardly bitter, which is self-centered. Where does jealousy come from? When a person is jealous, that means that they're selfish. That means that they're not content what God has given them, and they're looking across and saying, I want what that person got, I like what that person has, and I want it. How many of y'all seen it on the team? Matter of fact, I was just looking at a video, and it was talking about some athletes that was on a college team together. Some of y'all remember this, called the Fab Five. And those members was all great. They was all freshmen, and they was winning, and they got all the way to the Final Four and almost, I think, to the championship. But then all of a sudden, one person didn't like how another person been elevated by the news and by the people. He began to lift it up and say how great he was, but then the rest of them began to say, I'm just as good as he is, and it called it strife. Even to this day, those 5 members still not united. All because of jealousy and strife. Jealousy and strife. But then he goes down to the next. He said, strife in your heart. He said, this word strife, it comes from a place that means to intrigue for an office of a politician. It's basically saying that this word here, instead of meaning fighting, is implying that someone who goes out there trying to get other people to jump on their bandwagon, or to get on their favor, or to get in line with what they believe on. And you see this taking place in our society right now. You see it right now with our society. And the big thing that's happening is with this coronavirus. If you stop and look back and see how this coronavirus, they're utilizing this thing with coronavirus to divide us. And a lot has to do with the mask and the shot. If you get the shot, that means you ain't trusting God. If you're wearing the mask, you don't have faith. If you don't wear the mask, you don't care about nobody. If you don't get the shot, you hate me. Look what it's doing to the church. You got to stop back and look and say, what is going on, church? Don't let the world come inside of us and divide us. Don't let it happen. Because that's what the strife is. And you look all on your social media, you got people putting out words and articles to support their side. And we take those same things and we echo it. You know all. If you are, or if you know if you don't do this, and we bring it in the church. And we're being pulled away from each other. Pulled away. We got to get to the place where we just say, what do God want us to do? Instead of this tragic situation unite us, it is separating us. I got it. You want the shot? Get it. You don't want it? Don't get it. You want to wear the mask? Wear it. I wear it. If you don't want to wear it, don't wear it. I'm still going to love you. I'm still going to love you. It's not my place to judge you. Whatever conviction God put on your heart, that's what you need to follow. I remember a testimony of a missionary. And y'all may remember this as well. I can't remember where I heard it. It might have been somebody that came here to church, or I might have heard it somewhere else. And he went to this far country. And he said the Lord led him to cancel his health insurance on him and his wife. He said he knew it didn't sound right. His friends and family telling him he's crazy. He said, it don't make sense. He said, you may get over there and get sick. And that's exactly what happened. He went over there and his wife caught a disease. And this disease caused her to be paralyzed. And eventually he brought her back to the States and tried to get all this medical care. And he had her in the hospital. He had no money to pay for it, but he just trusted God. And he just sat there and seen how God brought in the money each month. He said eventually he began to see number of people in the hospital got saved. Because the people couldn't believe that all this medical treatment that he's getting, and they'll walk up to him and say, sir, you got another $10,000 bill. He said, well, don't worry about it. I'm going to go to my father. My father got enough money to cover it. And he'll get in the elevator. And as he going to his wife's room, he began to pray. He said, Lord, you heard what they just said. You told me to cancel my life insurance. This is where I'm at. He said, I need the money for my wife's care. He said, before the elevator can reach the floor, another person came in and said, hey, this is brother such and such from such and such church. He said, we took up a love offering. Well, I brought it here to give it to you. He opened it up. It was the exact amount that he needed to pay. Exact amount. So I don't know what God may be doing in your life as an individual. You have to follow what God is doing. What if he leads? It may not make sense to me, but you got to listen to him. It's not my wisdom. It's not me. You got to listen to him. So whatever God is doing in your life, you better just follow it. Trust him. Because just like this young man and his wife, a lot of people were telling him he was crazy. You're crazy. I'm sure other ministers told him, you're crazy. But he trusted God. And he said before it was over with, number of people in that hospital got saved. It got saved. And his wife still, I think she still was in a crippled state. But people got saved. God used his tragic situation to bring number of people to his kingdom. That's the goal, people. That's the purpose why God left us here. To make disciples. To bring others, point them to him. So if he has to bring some pain in your life to do that, trust God. Just trust him. He may bring blessing in your life, but if whatever he brings in your life, the purpose of it is you to use it to bring others to him. But we got to get out of this thing. First, it says bitter envy, which is selfish. Then you see strife. And the next one is boast and deceit. That means glory not and lie not against the truth. Because you begin to boast about yourself. This is a person who thinks he's good, who thinks he's knowledgeable. He begins to boast. And as he's boasting, eventually he's going to start lying. He's going to lie. He lie against the truth. Naturally, we all like to brag on our success. We like to brag and say, look what I got. Look what happened to me. Sometimes we get a little spiritual. Look what God gave me, y'all. But what we're really saying is, look what I got. Look at me. There's somebody in the Bible that did that. And that was what? Nebuchadnezzar. You remember him in the Bible in Daniel? As he sat out there and he began to look on his kingdom and said, look what I have accomplished. Look what I've done. And the Bible said, as he began to speak, the words in his mouth, God spoke to him and gave him a disease that made him think he was an animal. He said, you would stay this way until you realize who is God and who's the one that provides for you. He made it very clear. We need to learn from Nebuchadnezzar. Whatever success you have, whatever things you have, it all comes from God. It came from God. And God used Nebuchadnezzar for a purpose. For a purpose to benefit it. Yeah, he put them in captivity because he needed them to put them in captivity. So whatever the purpose that God may be giving you thing, it's bigger than you. It's bigger than you. But we come to the third one here. He talked about this earthly wisdom and how it is bitter envy, strife, and boast and deceit. But then he transitioned to talk about the heavenly wisdom. Look at verse 17. He said, it is pure, without defilement. It leads to peace. It's gentle, which means it's fit and appropriate without compromise. Gentleness don't mean that you just give in to what somebody desires. It means that you do whatever it takes without compromising God's truth. It makes us easy to work with. And then it said, full of mercy and good fruit. And to see you, when we begin to compare the two, looking at it from this perspective, it makes sense that we'll trust or we'll put our faith in what God has to say. But when we look at our lives, how many of our lives is destroyed because we are doing what man wants us to do? We're not trusting God. If we were trusting God, we would experience more of this holiness, more of this peace, gentleness, and make us easy to work with. And I'm talking about within the church. You expect the society to be beating on each other, but inside the church, we should see more pure peace, gentleness, easy to work with, mercy, good fruit. That's what should be seen. But if you don't see it, then you got to conclude that we're basing our wisdom and our understanding off of what? Earthly matters. But then look at verse 16. We come to the last one. This one here said, what makes us different? What makes earthly and heavenly wisdom different is they differ in their outcome. They differ in the outcome. Verse 16 says, this wisdom descended not from above, but is earthly, sensual, and devilish. For where envying and strife is, there is what? Confusion and every evil work. Right there, he make it very clear that when you put your faith in what the world say you should do, it's going to result in confusion and devilish work. But then look at what it says about heavenly wisdom. Look at verse 18. Verse 18 says here, and the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace. Church, I don't know about you, but it's an easy decision to say, I need to trust God. We all probably say in our mind, I need to trust God. But there's an adversary out there. For somehow he make us believe that trusting God is not the right way. You may say, well, not me. Look at your life completely. How many times have we failed and put our faith in earthly human wisdom? I'm just as guilty as you are. Just as guilty. But I'm going to give you an example here of a person who made that mistake and it cost them. Take your Bible and go to Acts 27. Acts 27. We're going to look at a voyage that Paul was on, his shipwreck. And I want you to look at it from a wisdom, godly wisdom versus an earthly wisdom perspective. You're going to have a shipmaster, the man who's the captain and the owner of the ship. He's going to be in a situation where he's going to have to provide some advice to the centurion. And then you're going to have Paul, on the other hand, who's just a preacher or a minister of God, and he's going to offer some advice to the centurion. So he has a earthly wisdom advising him, and he have godly wisdom advising him. And so they're in this situation, as you know, that Paul is a prisoner, is being taken to Rome because God says that you will stand before Caesar and preach. And so on their voyage, they had to get on the ship. So they came to this place where they had to board a ship, and as they began to get in the ship, they finally made it to this place called Safe Haven. Okay? So let's just pick it up now, and I'm going to pick it up in verse 9. He said, now when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous, they're coming toward the end of the season where sailors should not be out on the water. He said now, looking at verse 9, chapter 27, verse 9, he said, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them. So now the people are saying, we want to leave this place because it is not convenient. They don't have all the accommodations that this place about 3 miles down the road has. See? Makes sense. Naturally, human speaking, hey, there's a place about a few miles down the road. They got all the accommodations, and we can settle there for the winter. This place here don't have much. It's got little. He said, but we can go down the road, and we can do it. But then Paul stood up and said, I admonish you. Look at the verse here. Look at verse 10. He said, and said unto them, sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be hurt and much damage, not only of the laden and the ship, but also of our own lives. Remember who's talking. This is Paul, a man who represents what? God to the people. A godly man who represents godly wisdom. Paul is not a shipmaster, but Paul has an inside connection to God's understanding. So God is informing Paul. He said, Paul, let them know, don't go. Because this soft wind that they think is out there and it's seen to be easy enough for them to make it, is going to change on them in a dime. It's going to change them. They don't know that. That's why we got to trust God, because God has a different perspective than what we see. You and I, we only see what's in front of us. God sees all the way around us. He sees days and months and years ahead of us. And he's telling them, don't go. But then let's see here what else. Verse 12. This now he says, and because the haven was not commodious to winter in, the more part advised, which the majority of the ship members voted. Now, there's over 270 some people on the ship. He said, majority part advised to depart thence also, if by any means they might attain to Phoenice. Phoenice is the location where the more accommodations. And there to winter, which is an haven of Crete, and lieth toward the south, west and northwest. And when the south wind blew softly, boy, y'all gotta be careful with soft wind. Soft wind will deceive you. It looked nice. It looked comfortable. It looked pleasant. But as soon as you get out there, change on you. Supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loose thence, and they sailed close by Crete. They're trying to be wise. They understand they're selling at a time they shouldn't be selling. That's why he's trying to stay near the coast. He's trying his best to get down just a few miles down the coast to this place that had better accommodations. But then as soon as they get out there, the wind shifts and it takes them out into the sea. Now they're out there for several days. It's nighttime. It's dark. They can't see nothing because the storm is blocking the sun. But then look here at verse 21. He said, but after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, sirs, you should have hearkened unto me and not have loosed them from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life amongst you, but on the ship. And he tells them why. He said, for there stood by me this night an angel of God, whose I am and whose I serve, saying, fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God has given thee all them that sail with thee. And look at verse 25. Wherefore, sir, be of good cheer, for I believe God that it shall be even as it was told to me. So you got the godly counsel. Now Paul done stood up. They're out there floating around, don't know where they at because it's dark. The storm has just drifted them far out into the ocean, and they don't realize where their location's at. And Paul said, without much answer, he stood up and told them, be of good courage. Be of good courage. He is now about to give them God's wisdom. Fear not, because God has told me, I will stand before Caesar. And everyone that's in this boat, no one will die. Now that centurion soldier has to make a decision. Either I'm going to listen to Paul or I'm going to listen to the shipmaster. He listened to the shipmaster the first time and got him in trouble. Let's see that he learned his lesson. And then it goes here, look at verse 27. He said, but when the 14th night was come and was driven up and down the Andrea, about midnight, the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country, and sounded and found it at 20 fathom. And when they had gone a little farther, they sounded again and found it at 15 fathom. And what they're doing is they're dropping a line in the water. And then how far the line go down, it let them know how close they are to land. So they realized that, okay, the first time they went down far, the second time they went down less. And so they're saying, assume that they're getting closer to the bank or to some type of land because they can't see nothing. And then it says here, then fearing lest we should have fallen upon rock, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern and wished for the day. And as the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, when they had let down the boat into the sea, under color as though they would have cast anchors out of the foreship. What he basically said there, these shipmen, they know they don't have enough life raft for everybody. So they deceived them and said, hey, we're going to go out and make sure the anchors are secure, make sure everything is good, and they're basically lying to them. Because as soon as they got in the ship, they're going to drift off and leave them. But now notice, verse 31, how Paul, godly wisdom, stood up. He says here, Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, except these abide in the ship, ye cannot be saved. All right, soldier, centurion, if you're going to listen to what this man just told you, which was a lie, because that's what earthly wisdom does. Remember, earthly wisdom, what? Selfish, envy, self-centeredness. It's strife, which is basically, it's like a politician. You're trying to gain them to your side. And also he said that it don't lie against the truth. So all these are the basis of human wisdom. So this shipmaster is trying to use wisdom to deceive them so he can get away and save himself. He don't care about the people. He only care about his people. But notice how the centurion responded. He said, then the soldiers cut off the ropes of the boat and let her fall off. That centurion said, we're going to listen to Paul. Soldiers, cut that rope. He took away their means to escape. He said, we either all live or we all die. He trusted him. But let's keep on now. And look at verse 33. And while the day was coming on, Paul besought them all to take meat, saying, this day is the 14th day that you have tarried and continued fasting, having taken nothing. Wherefore I pray you, take some meat, for this is for your health, and for there shall not any hair fall from the head of you. Those who trust God and listen to his wisdom, even though you're in the midst of a storm, you have peace. You have peace. These men are able to sit down in a storm that is rocking their boat to and fro, and they're able to sit down and eat because they're listening now to the voice of God that is being spoken through Paul. And as they continue to drift on into their water, or drift on into their course, you'll see, y'all know the end of the story. The ship was wrecked, and not one soul was lost. All because they listened to God's wisdom. Initially, they listened to man's wisdom. Man's wisdom would put them in the chaos they were in. But God's wisdom got them out of it. Church, there will be days we may give into human wisdom. That's just how deceptive Satan is. That joke is slick. We're all guilty of prey to some of his deceptiveness. The only thing we have, like Brother Willie was talking this morning, we have the armor of God. And we got to just do what God told us to be on defense from the wiles of Satan. But when sometimes we don't read our Bible, we don't pray, and all of a sudden you go a day or a week, and all of a sudden a couple weeks, a month may go, you have not been studying, you have been reading, you have been praying, you have been fellowship with other believers. Guess what? You open yourself up for deception. And you find yourself out in the middle of an ocean, in the middle of a storm. But then all of a sudden you begin to pray, I remember God. I remember what he did for me. I remember who he is and how good he was. And you call out to his name, and God make a way for an escape. God gave these people peace in the middle of a storm. And the reason why they're in the storm, because they listen to human ways. But then they finally come to the conclusion that God's way is right, and God provides for them a safe way. Church, we got to get to the place we trust God. We listen to his word, and we trust what he tells us to do. It may not make sense to us, but we still got to trust it. So in closing, let's just talk about this God wisdom. God wisdom challenges our logic. It does. It challenges everything about us. Think about Jericho, the battle of Jericho. That don't make any type of war scenario logic. Walk around there 7 times and the walls will fall. You find me a war strategy that has walk around the city 7 times. But that's what God told them to do. And they was victorious because they trusted God. So sometimes doing what God tell you to do is not going to make sense to you. It's not going to make logical sense. The man that got rid of his medical care and went on the mission field didn't make sense, but he trusted God. He trusted God. And because he trusted God, God used him to bring many souls to him. Godly wisdom would contradict our self-honor. Man desire to be praised. Man desire to be lifted up and honored. But we see with Nebuchadnezzar, God shares his honor with no one. No one. He wants first place. And he tells us, and he made it very clear there, that he's the one that calls people to rise up and calls those to fall. He called nation to rise, nation to fall. And we got to get to the place where we trust God. If we follow God's wisdom empower us to overcome. How did that happen? You begin to follow God's revelation, because God's wisdom comes through revelation through his word. And as you begin to follow that revelation, it aligns us with God's wills and his promises. And I begin to get in line with his promises. That leads me to surrender myself to him. Because in order for me to obey, that's a form of surrender. I have to surrender myself. And when I begin to surrender myself to God, then I experience what they call the full of the Spirit, the full of the mercy, and the full of grace and truth. And what that means by being full of, that means that you're now controlled by God. Full of the Spirit don't mean you get more of the Spirit. It means that the Spirit has more of you. James said it here as well. And looking at verse 17, he said, full of mercy. Full of mercy. That means that a person is controlled by God, and they're able to apply God's mercy to everyday living. A good example of that is the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan. That Good Samaritan was on his way to caring about his business. He came across a Jewish person who was beaten and left for dead. This same person who was left for dead is the one that hated his race. Think about it. That made it known that they hated the Samaritan. But instead of showing hate and showing vengeance, he showed love. He showed mercy. He showed mercy. Because he was full of mercy, he was full of God control. We got to get to the place that God is controlling us and we're not controlling ourselves. When you get to that place, you better do things that you never thought you could do. You'll never be able to be in a place where God can say, you know what? Now I can trust you. Now I can use you to carry out my will. Just remember Paul. Paul was a man that was bringing havoc to the church. But when he met Jesus on that road to Damascus, and he knew right then that Jesus was the Messiah. And when he come to that conclusion that Jesus was the Messiah and he was God, he was number one, I mean, he changed like that. And all that devotedness that he had, it went from man to who? God. And he put his life on the line to serve God Almighty. What are you putting on the line for God? What are you and I putting on the line? Are you willing to put your reputation on the line? Are you willing to put your status in life on the line? All for the glory of God. What are you willing to sacrifice for him? Church, as we leave here today, I want you to just think about godly wisdom. Godly wisdom. And what it can do if you just trust it. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, I just thank you. I thank you for a message that spoke to my heart first, and how I need to trust you, not just sometime, but all the time. And Father, I pray that each and every one of us get to the place where we surrender our life to you and become full of the Spirit, full of mercy, and full of grace and truth. Someone that being controlled by you. Father, we all want to be used by you, Father. And I pray that this day that each and every one of us make that decision to put you number one in our life. As John began to lead us in this song, I need you to think about what is keeping you from trusting God. You may say, I put my faith in him. That's great, but are you trusting him with your daily living? I memorize scriptures. You know the verses. That's great, but are you applying it to your daily living? You know all the Bible doctrine. Outstanding. But do you know how good God is to you? As John leads us, y'all stand with us and sing with him.
325, trust and obey.
Trust and obey.